All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I think some folks are just kind of rolling in here. Yeah, thanks everyone for jumping on. Let's go ahead and dive right into it so we can make sure we get through all the material today. In this session, we're going to go over essentially the VCF automation capabilities. They're somewhat new. We just recently came out in 9.1. So we're going to kind of highlight generally, what some of those features are. But I'm also going to go through just a little bit of a briefing of, what we're doing in terms of currently with the product, and then also go into some of the features, and then we'll do a demo as well. So my name is Vincent Riccio. I'm a product marketing engineer. I'll be doing the presentation portion. And then Maher, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello, folks. My name is Mahar Lasfar. I'm also a product marketing engineer. I'm focused on the VCF automation.
Okay, well, let's just kind of jump right into it. And sort of the idea is, right, when we think about VCF automation and essentially what, that sort of encompasses for folks that are consuming VCF or using VCF is essentially that consumption portion, right? That's what a lot of our focus is, okay, you've made this investment into private cloud, and now you want to consume it, right? Now you want to be able to provide your organization with self-service or resource, the ability to spin up resources and stuff like that, which you'll see a little bit in the demo, as well as potentially working in sort of a multi-tenant or a quasi or somewhat multi-tenant way if you want to do it that way, right? We have different levels of tenancy that you can sort of configure as well. So let's just kind of jump a little bit into some of the new things that we've introduced into to VCF automation. And then once I'm done with a few slides here, we'll jump into the demo and show you around a little bit in the product. So a couple things really about VCF automation, just from a high level, is a couple things that we do have in the product, right? And sort of the main use cases are self-service, right? It's sometimes it can be done through a catalog. We have a self-service catalog which folks can publish blueprints and orchestrate our workflows to, as well as some other things in the product as well. And then we also have what we call an IaaS service section, or sort of a VCF services capability to be able to go in and just spin up something, right? If you just need a VM real quickly, you can go in and just spin up a VM. If you need a Kubernetes cluster, right, you can go in and just spin up a Kubernetes cluster. If you need a vSphere pod or a container, right, you can just go in and spin that up. You don't need to like have a catalog or a blueprint or go into the CLI. You can actually do all of that through the UI now. And so um, uh, you know, those are just some of the capabilities, right? As well as blueprinting and policies and some governance as well, in terms of where it kind of sits in the portfolio. But some of the new things that we'll go over today for the 9.1 launch here was, kind of we've done some enhancements around sort of, our application delivery and trying to reduce some friction in terms of how application teams actually deploy resources, consume infrastructure, and do sort of this IaaS capability, right? And one of the things that we introduced in 9.0 is the ability for VCFA users to deploy into namespaces, right? So as we deploy Kubernetes objects like VMs that are actually built on custom resource definitions from Kubernetes, or VKS clusters, right? The Kubernetes conformant clusters, or other objects as well, databases, stuff like that. We've deployed into namespaces, and those created like a boundary for compute as well as other things as well. But one thing that we did introduce in the product was the ability to capture an existing namespace, a running namespace, as sort of a as sort of something you can deploy over and over again. So we'll take a look at that. I've got a slide on that. We'll do a demo. We call that App Stack, and essentially it's a way for us to reuse deployments, kind of a labs as a service, sort of use case potentially. And we have done some other enhancements too, like how we manage content in the system. And you might see a little bit of that today in the demo. I'll go over a little bit in the slides, but getting a little more granular in how folks can or what, how they can manage and sort of consume OVAs and images and stuff like that for their deployments. And then we'll talk a little about some of the namespace enhancements in the VCD migration tool. In the 9.1 UI, there's actually, well, in the 9.0 and 9.1 UI, there's a provider portal and an organization portal. And in the provider portal now in 9.1, we do have a VCD migration tool in there that will, move some things from VCD over into VCF automation. And then also, one of the things that we've done with the product over the years is try to focus a lot on governance. And getting that costing and security in there as well. We've had integrations with Operations Manager for costs and stuff like that. But in recent releases, we've brought in some additional costing for some Kubernetes objects inside of the product. So when you deploy a VM using the custom resource definitions and so forth, we can now get costing from that for that in our clusters. And so just getting that visibility, that upfront pricing when you go to deploy something will be available. And then, and also I kind of mentioned earlier, a little bit earlier, how the product is, kind of multi-tenant in a sense, right? And we call those tenants really kind of organizations. And these organizations essentially allow us to sort of, isolate folks, right? Isolate projects, isolate resources, and we could do that, pretty granularly now through VPCs and some of the networking constructs. But one of the things that you need to do as a provider is you need to essentially be able to provide quotas for your tenants, right? Either you give them a quota or you just let them have access to everything in a particular region. And a region is another new construct that we have in 9.0 that came out, a while back, which is essentially a way to carve out compute from your vSphere environment and then assign that to an organization. And it kind of goes with our supervisor type of compute and quotas and stuff like that. But essentially, at a higher level, it's mostly just being able to assign compute and stuff like that to your tenants. And so we've done some enhancements there. As well. And one of the new features we've also introduced is infrastructure policies. Infrastructure policies allow us to essentially go out and do a little bit of abstraction. So when you deploy things through VCF automation, we can now consume compute policies within the vCenter environment and then place things properly on the right host. And I'll talk a little about that. And then some additional support for some networking capabilities like VLAN back networks for your external connections. So if you did not want to use the overlay within NSX for your external connections for your organizations, we now have the ability to do VLAN back and support for some additional sort of on-demand or self-service networking for the organizations for things like NAT, VPN, and static routes and so forth. And then just expanding the services. When 9.0 came out, one of the big things we have been working on has been just the services that get bubbled up into the UI, and also can be accessed and administered through the CLI, of course, and API. But being able to bubble those up to make it easy, like for instance, DSM, Data Services Manager, right now it kind of can pop in there if that's enabled, and then you have the ability to deploy and manage databases. And a number of other services, right, for secrets, containers, VMs, and so forth, volumes and networks, and then a number of extended services as well that we have in the product. And there's this whole services framework, right? And you see that there as well in the third column, the services framework enhancements to make it easier to say, okay, I want these organizations to have access to these services, and so forth. So real quick, just summary on that. I'll go through a few of the slides. I'm not going to probably go through every single slide, but I'll just give you a little bit of insight into what we're going to be talking about, especially in the demo here. I'll probably just go through it just a handful, and then we'll kick it over to the demo here in a minute. So one is the first thing I talked about, which is the app stack formation. And this is really a way to go in and take a running namespace and capture it. So for instance, in a namespace, you could have a number of VMs in that namespace that are connected to subnets that have persistent volumes or have storage associated with them. They may also have some metadata. Maybe there was some guest OS information and so forth, BIOS information, IP information. And what we can do is we can capture that working application, that environment, and then create a blueprint out of it, and then ultimately publish it into the catalog, where folks said, look, this namespace has my application, it has the objects I need, but we just want to redeploy it over and over again. spin it up, tear it down, spin it up for testing, or some kind of lab or labs as a service type of thing, then that's what ultimately the use case is. So there's a couple of different type of captures. I think in the demo we'll go through the customization one, but that will allow you to capture it and do some things to configure it at request time, right? So this is one of the new features that we have in the product. This does have a few prerequisites associated with it that we'll also talk about, and this is one of them. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was we were doing, more and more to help with managing content across the organizations, and there's really kind of a couple different approaches that we take. One is managing content from a provider level and pushing content down to organizations. But then each organization or tenant has the ability to create their own content libraries and manage their own content, which would be sort of, specific and design or designated just to their organization. And one thing we've done is created this construct called a project content library, which allows us to essentially get a little more granular in how we want to manage content, right? So, for instance, we might say I want a particular project inside the system to have a content library available to them, but then we can also have permissions associated with that. So, if they have a project content library where they're uploading their images and stuff like that for deployments, then we can give each particular project permissions such as read and write or read only. If they have read only, they will only be able to upload the images. If they have read and write, then they can consume and upload images and so forth. So it's just a way to get more granular in how we allow folks to consume content and images and so forth from the tool. Okay. And then the next one of the next features is sort of like I mentioned earlier, some of the namespace enhancements, right, that we've been doing in the product. And one of them is being able to self-service namespaces for various users within the organization. So now one thing that we can do is project admins, which could be like your line of business admin or maybe like your project team lead or an app team lead, can now go in and create namespaces on the fly using self-service. So this essentially, the organization admin will go in and create a template that will say, okay, this is sort of the options that project admins will have when they go to create a namespace, such as the region it's going to be associated with, the classes, the networks that'll be available, any shared subnets or infrastructure policies. And so when project admins go to actually deploy a namespace, those are the options and inputs that they'll see available to them. So then it kind of lists them over here, the regions, namespace classes, subnets, VPCs, and if they're using AVI load balancers, then the service engine groups will also show up available as during that namespace creation as an option there. So it just breaks down the dependency a little bit on org admins and folks that may may have other responsibilities, and it gets it a little closer to the application team itself. So and what's nice about this is that when you do create namespaces in VCF automation, you do have the opportunity or the ability to actually consume them, right? So you deploy the namespace, you see them in the UI in a drop down, so you can visually see all your namespaces. Just click on those namespaces, and then you'll see the objects associated with them. So it makes it pretty easy to sort of manage those and see those. Okay, so the other thing that I'll talk about real quick is just the VCD migration path. So for customers that are on VCD, vCloud Director, maybe your cloud service provider or a customer that happen to use this product for a true multi-tenant sort of situation, because that was generally the use case, is we now have a tool inside VCF Automation 9.1 that will essentially migrate some of like the ORVDC and some of the networking capabilities over into VCF Automation. So VMs are imported from the ORVDC resource pools into namespaces inside of VCF Automation, clusters and regions and projects. And ultimately, namespaces inside of VCF Automation will be the targets for things that get moved over. Anyway, so just kind of be aware that this is available. The other thing is costing. So now we have sort of this cost visibility for the project, as well as the namespaces within the that have been deployed and are consumed through VCF Automation. So again, additional cost visibility, as well as upfront pricing. Now, if you go into Operations Manager 2, you can create a bill and that bill will show up as well within VCF Automation for the organization. So under the administration section, they'll see a bill section and they can see a bill there. So if you're doing like a chargeback or a showback type of situation, right, then that would be available. Also, when folks go to request something now, like a VKS cluster or a VM, or I think those are the main two that are getting costing right now, they'll see upfront daily price estimates. So they'll say, if you do this deployment, right, that system will come back and tell you that this is the estimated cost based upon the cost drivers and pricing cards within Operations Manager, and it's very policy driven from there as well. Um, so that's kind of just, some additional costing capability here. Let me jump down actually to the networking pieces a little bit, and then we'll jump into the demo just for kind of the sake of time. So one of the things that we have the ability to do is the distributed gateway. I think that's what this one is. Choice network. Yeah, distributed gateway. Okay, so this was essentially a new way to get out externally from your organization. So inside an organization, there's these gateways that you can connect to on the VPC, the virtual private cloud. They're transit gateways, right? And so some of those will go northbound. But generally what we've done in 9.0 is we went northbound to a T0, to an NSX overlay, a T0, right? So essentially we went up that way, and that's how we got out to the outbound network. Now what we can do is we could put a VLAN in there with the gateway CIDR. And then once we do that, we now have access to just outbound communication on that VLAN. So that could be a subnet that folks choose when they are deploying a VM for the networks of the virtual machines and so forth. So just another way to consume existing infrastructure, consume your existing VLANs for those use cases where maybe the overlay isn't needed, or you have to consume a VLAN instead. And another thing that I talked a little bit earlier was some of the self-service networking capabilities within the project now, or within an organization. Sorry. So inside an organization, you'll see that there's a section called transit gateways, and those are going to be your gateways that will allow for communication, right, to the VPCs in the organization. So we have the ability now to go in and create like NAT, SNAT, DNAT, and a couple other type of NATs, right? There's no NAT and things like that are in there, as well as policy-based or route-based VPNs, and then any static routes, right, for your next hop type configurations. So essentially, I think those are kind of some of the main topics. There's probably one or two here and there that probably missed here, but for the sake of time, I'll probably go ahead and kick it over to Maher here to go through the demo. And I think in the demo, we're going to see maybe the app stack and namespace self-service. So, or whatever else you got for us, Maher, but I'll go ahead and kick it over to you.
Thanks, Vincent. Let me go full screen here. So just given the time we have, we sort of landed on showing you the namespace capture, which is really the primary feature that we're introduced in 9.1 VCF Automation 9.1. So this feature is going to be dependent on a few things. Let's call them sub-features, and these sub-features are pretty much features on their own. So we're going to be interacting with one or more things that was introduced in 9.1 to enable the namespace capture as blueprint, or the use case application app stack. So we have an organization. It's an all app organization in VCF Automation that's been configured. We're using our Active Directory, and we're logging in as Jason, who is the organization admin. So Jason, the first thing is going to do, he has a specific project. So this can be done or would be done on a project-to-project basis. So I have only one project called sales. And the first thing I'm going to do is we have this namespace self-service. The namespace self-service, as you can see right now, we have two existing namespaces that was created by Jason, but also Jason wants to delegate this to the project administrator. Every project, which is a collection of users, can have a project administrator that can create blueprints, onboard users, grant these users certain permissions. But right now, these were not created by the project admin themselves, but was created by the Jason as the org administrator. So Jason wants to delegate that kind of sort of a role. So it allows the project administrator now, starting with 9.1, to be able to create the namespaces. And we're going to see two ways of creating these namespaces, one being the UI and one being the blueprint, which results in creating on-demand namespaces. And namespaces, for those that do not know, is just the playground or the infrastructure where we're going to provision our workloads, virtual machines, VKS clusters, etc. So the first thing we're going to do is we have a bunch of users here. You can see the user name, and our project administrator for this demo is Connie. Connie is the project administrator. John is the project user. Mary is the project advanced user, which allows the advanced user can interact with the IaaS services directly, like the virtual machine service, the Kubernetes service, etc. And the John as the project user can only use the catalog. And then we have Anita as the project auditor. So this is just an introduction into some of the project roles. But what we're trying to do here, Jason is trying to enable Connie to be able to create on-demand namespaces as its project, as the project administrator, and as that project, the sales project needs in terms of infrastructure. They can deploy workloads too. So starting with the namespace self-service, this is something that we've introduced in 9.1, and it allows project administrator like Jason to have the necessary permissions to create namespaces and grant those permissions to the project administrator. And this is, think of this as we are giving them all the different things that we want the project administrator to only select from when they actually create a namespace. So for example, what region we want to make available to them. So here I'm going to make the US East, for example, and the supervisor contained in that region, or the infrastructure contained in that region, available to them. When they're creating the namespace, they can only create a namespace in this region specifically. So I'm just picking and choosing what I want to make available to them. So next is the namespace class. This namespace class is basically a template that has all the configuration that the namespace you're provisioning is going to inherit. So things like what t-shirt sizing or VM classes I want to make available, what backend storage I want to use, what images via the Conan library. So all this stuff is basically contained in the namespace class. And what we're doing is that we're only making small as the namespace class available for Connie, the project administrator, when she creates, for example, a namespace. On the networking side, you can allow them to create. You can allow the project administrator to create and make use of the shared VPCs, or allow them to create dedicated VPCs. So shared VPCs, that means there is one or more namespace using the same network boundaries, or the VPC. That's why it's called shared VPC. And if you have dedicated VPC that is used specifically by namespaces and nothing else, no other namespaces will be using that, you can allow them to create a dedicated VPC. So we're going to stick with the shared VPC, and here, or both, we'll just click both. And then to use the shared VPC, you have to select what shared VPC you want to select. So if you have multiple, we only have one here, which is the default VPC created for the US East. So we're going to select that. And to be able to create dedicated VPC, we give them access to the connectivity profile, which is the template that allows us to create the VPC that we need. So we only have one connectivity profile that has the external connection to what external connectivity or gateway it needs to select. And then moving on to the subnet, and this is a new feature in also 9.1, that the provider can share VLANs and share those VLANs with one or more organizations. So it looks like our Acme organization has been given a subnet 2357 and is shared, and I want to make this available to the project administrator if they want to make this subnet available within the namespace that they're creating. So in addition to the infrastructure policy that Vincent talked about, these are really placement policies. Some are mandatory enforced by the provider, and some are optionals, and really ties to the specific. If you want a specific placement for specific VM, like let's say Oracle workloads needs to go on a specific host that are licensed to run Oracle, and so forth. So we'll select all of them, make them available to the project administrator, Connie, and then we can review our selections and simply submit. We can always go back and review our selections, add a few things, modify it for that specific project. So it's on a project to project basis. Okay. Next, we're going to go back and actually log off as Jason and log in as Connie, the project administrator, to see if she has now the power and the privileges that will allow her to create her own namespaces. So as we saw, we have two namespaces here. Connie can always go back to the namespace servers and see what the org administrator, for example, gave her access to, and then she can go back to the namespace, for example. And the first way to create a namespace is directly in the UI. So I simply go and select create namespace. I'm going to give it a name. We'll call this Acme Staging, for example. And then when Connie as the project administrator clicks on the namespace class, remember we only gave her access to small as a namespace class, and that's the only value the project administrator is going to see. Only the values that we made available to the project administrator. So think of this like guardrails or control or a policy, basically. So Connie is going to select US East because, again, that's the only region we made available to her, the zone that is included in that region, and that's only one zone. All the infrastructure policy she wants to select that, again, we made available. And again, here she can go and create a dedicated VPC and select the connectivity profile for that if she wants a dedicated VPC for the namespace. Again, this is a dedicated networking, in another word. But we're going to go stick with the shared VPCs and select our default VPC, again, that Jason made available to us. Also, we shared the subnet 2357, and we made it available. And it looks like Connie can also select that and make it available as yet another wire or network available that virtual machines can be connected to this VLAN, for example. And then we can go and click our create, and this will create our namespace. So that's the first option. And if we expand that, we can see all the different options that we use to create this namespace, everything from the VM classes available. Again, all these storage class, for example, and VM class came from that small namespace class or template that we use to provision the staging namespace. If we click on build and deploy and drop the namespace selector, we can see the staging namespace that Connie, as a project administrator, created for her project users. And if we click on overview, we have access to all the services within the staging sort of a namespace. And we can access virtual machine, Kubernetes container service, the network service, volume service, etc. Another way Connie is able, as the project administrator, she is able to author blueprints. This is using infrastructure as code YAML. So as you can see here, I have a blueprint already created as Connie, and Connie can basically create, use the elements in the canvas and drag and drop. So the first one that we highlighted here is the namespace. And we are using all the property or all the values that was made available by the org administrator. So we can create a blueprint, and now every time I can version control this blueprint and publish it to the catalog. Now all Connie's project users can go to the catalog and be able to create this namespace on demand. So if we request deployments, or this is, let's say, my app deployment, I'm going to give it a name. For the namespace that's going to create. This is a new namespace that's going to be on demand. It's only associated with the deployment. So when you delete the deployment, the namespace Acme Sandbox will basically be deleted. Also, we have the daily price estimate, where we can go and actually look at the breakdown of the virtual machine we're provisioning in the Acme Sandbox namespace. And once we're ready, we can hit submit and wait a few minutes or seconds. And here, if we click into the deployment, we can see the topology, we can see the virtual machine. If we click on the virtual machine, we see all the details. We can also take day 2 actions on the machine. But if we go to the sandbox directly namespace, this is the namespace that we created. So that takes us to the namespaces menu under manage and govern as the project administrator. And you can see now we have 4 namespaces. So we started with 2, Acme Dev and Acme Production, and then we created the staging from the UI and the sandbox using a catalog via the infrastructure as code blueprint. All right, so now if we go into the overview, obviously we see our Acme Sandbox selected in the namespace selector, and we see our virtual machine And if we go to the service, we see that our virtual machine got deployed as a result of the blueprint. And we can exit from here and switch to the second demo. So what I just showcased here is that we introduced a way to grant the project administrator to create namespaces on demand when their project users need them for destinations where they can provision workloads and applications. Now, the namespace self-service happens to be one of the requirements for the namespace capture. And when we're logging in here as an org admin, one of the things that the org admin needs to do for a specific project is to go and do that namespace self-service. So I'm going to quickly go through this exactly the same way we went to do, but because it happens to be one of the requirements that needs to be created to be able to do a namespace capture. So now that the namespace self-service, and we went through all the detail, through this in details, the next requirement would be to actually create a project content library. Project content library is also a new feature in 9.1, where it enables you to create, instead of creating an org-wide content library that holds all the images, you can actually create a personal, let's say, project level content library where you can host your images. And what we need to do here is that we want to pick the sales project because we want the sales project to have access to this, read and write. And the reason for the write is that when we capture a namespace, all the virtual machine running within that namespace, we publish the images for those virtual machines. So the project sales would need to have a write access to this project level content library. And of course, this needs a backend storage. So we're going to select in what region we want to make this available. So this is going to be available in the US West region. And then we're going to create our content library. So this is a content library that's currently empty. It has no images whatsoever. So if we go to the overview, we're going to go now to the third requirement. The third requirement is that we need a VM group. VM group is a new also feature in VCF Automation 9.1, and it really use it to share collective operations, something like power management. So one of the requirements that all the virtual machines in this development environment, for example, this is the namespace we want to capture, Acme Dev, and it has 2 virtual machines. So we're going to give this, it has 2 Linux virtual machines. So we're going to give it a name like Linux VM group. The starting power state always going to be powered on, but one of the requirements is that once I add these machines, before I can do the capture, one of the requirements is that these virtual machines need to be powered off. So first we have 2 Linux VM in the Acme development namespace. I'm going to select those and add them to the VM group. Another thing the VM group allows you to do is basically add different waves. These waves allows you to control, for example, which VMs gets booted first. And then here you can see I'm moving Linux 2 to wave 2 because I want, for example, let's say the second VM to start 30 seconds later. So what's going to happen is that when we deploy this from the blueprint that we're going to generate as a result of the capture, we have this VM group that's going to control the order of booting, if you will. Also, as I'm going through the VM group workflow, and just like the virtual machine service, the container service, the Kubernetes service, we generate the Kubernetes YAML that you can download and use with GitHub or Git source control repos, or for example, things like Argo CD for continuous deployment for Kubernetes. So we're going to go next, review and confirm, and hit finish. This is going to create the VM group for us. It has 2 VMs. And I can actually use the day 2 action on look at the content here, but also I can use the day 2 action and power off all the VMs that is a member of this group. Because again, as a third requirement for the namespace capture, the VMs needs to be turned off. So if we go to virtual machines, you can see now the 2 virtual machines are powered off, and we're ready to go to the overview namespace where we have 2 virtual machines, Linux 1 and Linux 2. and we're ready to create on the capture as a blueprint. So what we're doing is that we built a lab, let's say call it a sandbox, and we prepped it with all the virtual machines and the applications that we need to make available for different project users, and now we can capture it. So the capture as a blueprint is going to go through some self-checking in terms of to see if it can identify anything. For example, one thing here to note is that as of 9.1, the only supported workload for namespace capture is virtual machines. So for example, if you had a Kubernetes cluster in this namespace where you need to capture, it's going to tell you that's not supported as of yet. So it will block you from the namespace capture. So you'll see any violation when it comes to the capturing of the namespace. Once that happens, that puts us into the blueprint details for the blueprint that's going to be generated as a result of the capture. So we're going to give it a name called Linux Group Capture. And then the content library, which is the project content library that we've selected. This is the content library where the images of those two virtual machines is going to be saved to when we hit capture. Also, we have two types of captures here. An identical copy, meaning MAC addresses, IP addresses, nothing will change. It's an identical copy and you can capture it once and deploy it multiple times. This is great for things like hands-on labs, sandbox environment, where you need a repeatable, basically, environments over and over and over without causing any conflicts. But for this demo, we're going to also show you the capture with customization. Now, as you do this, you're going to see a warning. If these warnings or issues will tell you, for example, that the blueprint generated will not be deployed successfully if you don't resolve these issues. However, some of these are just simply informational. So you'll see two sections in the warning section. So the top section is specific to the capture of the namespace, and the one at the bottom is specific to the identical copy. And let's click on one of the caveats of what are some of the requirements you need for identical copy. It says it right there in first bullet. The VPC is not a dedicated VPC. So that tells you that when you're doing an identical copy, you need the namespace that you're capturing need to be using a dedicated VPC. So, and the reason for that is that for identical copy, we need to preserve IPs and MAC addresses, and this prevents IP and MAC address retention at the VM NICs. Therefore, we can do identical copy. And this is the second half of this review issues is what it's telling you. The first two is simply informational. That's those two VMs has a bootstrap, and all the secrets and stuff will be dropped. This is something normal because we're doing anyway customization, which we're going to do next. So we're going to close this, select capture with customization, and you have two options you can allow your users when they're selecting the blueprint. Do you want the user to pick different VM and storage classes? And this is great because that will create inputs automatically in the blueprint, which is the infrastructure as code that we generate. If you want the users to select, different sizes than the one we were using at the time of the namespace capture. So if there are namespace VM classes available other than small, for example, let's say medium or large, and you want your user to select that, then you would check this box. Also, if you have different storage classes, so you might have different storage classes pointing to different storages. Like, for example, let's say you have vSAN, NFS, and iSCSI, fiber channel. So you can actually select the storage class or the backend storage based on that, and you can let the user select. The other thing is that we want to configure the guest OS. So there are two user experiences here that you need to be aware of, is that if we select all the VM and hit configure, it allows us to say, okay, do you want to auto-generate the password for the default user, or do you want the user to specify that password, what we select here. What it doesn't allow you here is to set host name for each of the VM if you need to change it. If something like that you need to do, you can actually select one VM at a time, since every VM is going to use a different host. And if you go configure, you'll get access to the host name, and you can provide your host name here. And of course, for the bootstrap type in both scenarios, you can use Cloud Init Linux prep or VApp config. VApp config is more if you're injecting things into an OVA. Linux prep is an old specifically for VMware and allows you to run scripts if you want. Cloud init is not because we're doing customization. It's simply not going to run here. So we're gonna deselect this, and we can't publish this to the catalog due to the fact that we found some issues. That's okay. That's once we hit the capture, it's gonna start the capture process. It's gonna tell us where you can view the status of the capture. That takes you to the recent captures. You got this pop-up that says the capture is completed. And if we click the double arrows or refresh, we see it completed. Click the double arrows, and we see all the subtasks that we went through. So we did a data capture completed. We did a validation, which was completed. We successfully found the 2 VM images and published them successfully, and then generated the blueprints. And that basically ends the namespace capture completed. Now, if we go to the blueprint design, we see the capture. This is auto-generated. So if we click into it, look at this. You have a built-in infrastructure as code blueprint where you don't have to configure it from scratch. And you can see, for example, all the inputs. And these inputs were created because we checked that box to allow the user to select their own t-shirt sizing, if you will, these are the t-shirt sizing or the VM classes that are available within the namespace based on the namespace that we captured. Also, when we go down to the output, we actually provide a bit of use information here for the user to actually look at a table of all the virtual machines. This is auto-generated as well. And if we look at the resources like the namespace, we can see the namespace and all the values in terms of the namespace, in terms of how much CPU it has, how much reservation for memory and CPU, and all those. These are based on the source namespace. And if you need to change them at this time, you can. So you can reduce them, you can increase them if you want based on your business requirement. You can also add more elements. So let's say I want to add a Kubernetes cluster to this. I want to add more VMs to this. This is your opportunity to do such thing before you actually version control and publish this catalog, which once you do, it will be available now in the catalog, and any project user of project sales can now request this blueprint, and and every user can create their own deployment. So the user can choose the VM class and the t-shirt sizing. Again, because we check that box, we can select the storage class we want, and we can provide the password for each of those VMs because we opted for the user to provide these passwords. Also, we see a daily price estimate and a breakdown. And once we're ready, we can hit submit. And once the deployment is completed, we can take day 2 actions on the deployment level, things like deleting the deployment, changing the lease if there's a policy, editing the deployment, or powering off all the VMs within this deployment. So if we look at more, these are all the resources that got deployed as a result. And then if we go into the deployment itself, we see this overview output property that I showed earlier, where now we're giving, this is where you can add more informational to this section where you can give the user what exactly they just deployed. These are the virtual machines, their status, they're powered on, the IP addresses, the t-shirt sizing, and what zone they're deployed in. Right, if we go to the topology, of course, we see the topology similar to what we saw in the blueprint. And once we close here, we can go to the virtual machines, and we can see the 2 virtual machines we turned off. These are where in the source VM, in the source namespace, acme-dev, where the new virtual machines now, similar to the one we captured, are ready and up. And these are in a completely new namespace called Linux Group Capture. If we actually want to see how that looks in vCenter, you can see this is the new Linux group namespace that got created as a result of the blueprint, where we have Linux 01 and Linux 02 deployed, compared to the source namespace where Linux 01 and 02 were powered off to the for the sake of the to do the namespace capture, basically. And that's all I had for the demo. And I think we're 1 minute over. So I'll hand it over to Vincent to close.
Yeah, thanks, Maher. Great demo. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I think we are at time. Just wanted to thank everyone. I think there was one question that came in that I did answer, but I thought I would just kind of. So yeah, we have made some additional enhancements on the VMs as well. Snapshots, network day two, and the VM groups like that you saw with Maher. So I just wanted to throw that out there too, since someone had asked that question. So I appreciate the question. All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining, and have a great rest of the VMUG.
Thank you.